some of you may say we learn from experience, which is like learning also from observations. You look, you may learn from experience. Okay, there's a lot we can learn from experience for sure. But is it enough? So let me give you an example here. Now, experience tells me that this is solid, right? I can't go through it. You'd agree, right? Can't go through it. It's a picture frame. I can't walk through it. So my experience tells me I can't walk through that. Cool, that's all I need to know. Except I'm wrong. Because there's much more to know about that thing being solid. In fact, if I slow down the particles that are moving really fast together in this thing here, I can, in fact, pass through it. Science fact, not science fiction. So there are things we learn from experience, sure, but there are also things that we need to be taught. The basic laws of physics, the basic laws of chemistry are things we need to be taught in schools. And this is why when I talk about theories of development, I can't separate them from teaching and learning, because the important other, the caregiver, you guys, the mentors, the teachers, they are the ones that lead children to understand things that are not available to our sight or to our touch or to our experience. Now, one of the first theories that started getting very excitable in the early 20th century was behaviorism, and the next was constructivism. But the first thing I want to actually do here is to have a look at a video here. Now I'm going to be I'm going to stop sharing. That's what I've got to do. Bear with me, psychologist, not genius. Okay, so I just need to stop that and then share this with you. Where did it go? Let me know if I'm sharing. Am I sharing? Can you see this? Hand up, anybody? Can you see this?
You see yours? Turn around, look at yours.
Yes.
Julia?
Yes, we can see it.
Wait, calm down. Shadow. That's your shadow. That's your shadow. That's your shadow. See? That's just your shadow. See the shadow? What is that, your shadow? Are you afraid? Come on, we're going this way. It's just your shadow. It's just your shadow. You can't get away from it.
Okay, so what I want to ask you is, what do you notice about that video? What does anybody notice? Yes,
it starts
Shannon.
with fear.
Yes, Shannon. I've got Shannon. Yes, Shannon.
Hi there, it's Zion speaking.
Oh.
I say the child had a new experience. It was something new that they were learning.
Right. What else does anybody notice there? Tori, was it Tori? Sorry, old person needs to put glasses on to read small names. Tori, did you have
Yes.
your
It started with fear. Some of them, the video was a bit glitchy, but I think they started off quite fearful
of their shadow?
Mm.
Yeah. Anybody else got an idea of something that we want to say about that video? Anything you noticed besides afraid of the shadow, fear? Anything else anybody want to say?
Yeah, I can't see my hand, but parents mediating, parents explaining.
Right. Who is that?
This is
Sorry,
Dorothy.
Dorothy. Absolutely. So the parents are telling them that's your shadow. Don't worry, it's not going to eat you. It's your shadow. Now, experience on its own, remember we spoke about experience on its own, wouldn't have told us that that thing wasn't going to eat us. We needed a mediator, as Dorothy says, to tell us that. Something else you might have noticed is that this seems to be quite universal. There were boys, there were girls. The rest of the video is, you can go and click and watch it. I didn't want to show the whole video, but you'll see they are different race groups and different language groups. All of the children at around that age group are responding in the same way to their shadow. Development's universal, okay? You can't say that some person develops and another one doesn't, okay? It's universal. Human development is universal and it unfolds over time. Now, this doesn't mean that we all develop at the same rate, but we all do develop. Okay, so let's go on. The first theory that comes out in the early 20th century is behaviorism. Now, some of you may have heard of behaviorism, and it's actually very useful to you as teachers and mentors, because behaviorism focuses on shaping observable behavior. They're not interested in what's happening in the mind. They're only interested in observable behavior and shaping and conditioning behavior. So nice little picture of the dog here. And, you know, when food comes to you, you do this as well as the dog. You know, you start salivating. And what happens is, in order to condition the dog to salivate without the food, you ring the bell with the food, right? And the dog begins to associate the bell with the food. Now, before you think, gosh, this is really odd, when you were at school and break time bell went, did you ever feel yourself salivating? You might have. There was no food there, but the bell went. Okay, you've been conditioned to the fact that you were going to get food. Why is this useful to you? It's useful to you as mentors, as teachers, as guides, because you can shape the behavior that you want to see, and you can get rid of the behavior you don't want to see. Now, when I say get rid of behavior, I'm not talking about punishment. Punishment really is very ineffective. You know, if I had evidence that children responded with positive behavior to hidings, I would say go and beat the living daylights out of them. But in fact, there is absolutely no evidence that hitting a child will stop bad behavior. It goes underground, and it comes out later in life as something pretty bad. So I'm not talking about punishment here. When you want a behavior to stop, what you do is you ignore it. You take away any reward. Why do children in classrooms misbehave? Because you give them attention. So if you're in an after-school club and some child is running amok, and you're running after them saying, stop, 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 naughty, naughty, go outside, you're in fact doing exactly what the child needs to continue that behavior, because you're paying attention to it. I'll give you an example. Well, I have a daughter. She's 13, teenage years, very exciting. And when she was about 3, I took her to a Woolworths, Cavendish Woolworths here in Cape Town. I'm not sure where you guys are from. And she wanted a chocolate, and she proceeded to lose all sense of reality and have a temper tantrum in order to get the chocolate. Now, as I know, you don't respond to that behavior, because if you respond to it, even negatively, even if you go, stop it, you are responding. So I went and sat down and I watched her, and she went for about another 3 seconds, and then she looked at me, got off the ground, dusted herself off, and came back to me. Okay, the behavior I didn't want, I just ignored. Same thing goes with the behavior that you want. Okay, if you want a child to do well, if you want a child to succeed, praise every step of that way. Star charts do work. Rewards do work. Intermittent rewards work better than consistent rewards, but behaviorism, although it's highly discredited today, not discredited, it's highly frowned upon by psychologists today. It is in fact a really useful theory for shaping behavior. What it doesn't do, however, is it doesn't talk about the mind, the cognition. I'm not going to show you this video, but if you look, it will be in the chat for you. This is John Watson, very famous behaviorist, and this is poor little baby Albert. And little baby Albert loved fluffy things, but all babies are afraid of noise. Okay, it's an evolutionary, instinctual survival mechanism. When noise goes, babies freak out. Okay, it's their way of alerting the tribe to the fact that they're about to get eaten. Baby Albert loved fluffy things, and then John Watson would pair lovely fluffy toys with a big noise, until eventually baby Albert was terrified of anything fluffy, bunnies, stuffed toys, etc. Okay, this is a completely unethical experiment. Baby Albert was an orphan and was just used by John Watson. But have a look at the video when you've got a chance to see how you can condition behavior. Now, don't go out in the world and start conditioning people, okay? But bear in mind that you can reinforce behavior that you want to continue, and you don't reinforce behavior that you want to disappear. Okay, so what does behaviorism actually give us? It tells us that that behavior that's positively reinforced will reoccur. Okay, so if someone is being naughty and you respond to them, it will happen again. If they're being naughty and you ignore them, it's likely to phase out. Information should be presented in small amounts so that responses can be reinforced. This is called shaping. Behaviorism works extremely well with children with attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. That particular disorder is very badly named. It's attention deficit. In fact, it's not a deficit of attention. They are hyper attentive. So everything, every sound, everything they look at and they want to engage with. And behaviorism is a very good way to work with children with ADHD, where you chunk work into little bits for them. And reinforcements will generalize across similar stimuli. So what's behaviorism good for you? What does it work for you? Okay, what work can it do for you? Well, it can help you to deal with behaviors. It can help in classroom management. Very, very good to use in classroom management. Okay, with children from across the age range. From about 12 upwards, you're dealing with children who are able to think abstractly, and you can negotiate consequences with them. Below that, between like 7 and 12, they can think only in concrete ways, so you have to write down the rules for them, and below that they're not really able to think logically at all, but they're really fascinating. So there are challenges with behaviorism. Learning and development is about more than just observable behavior. We are not blank slates. Any of you who have children will know that your children did not come into this world as blank slates, okay? They come wired. Now, how that wiring pans out depends on the context, but they come with this brain. It's not developed yet, and it won't be developed until they're about 25, 27. But they come with a brain with lots of synapses firing, okay? So we can't just, when we're talking about development, can't just focus on behavior. So then a very famous, probably the most famous educational psychologist to ever live is a guy called Jean Piaget. And he came up with a theory he calls genetic epistemology, which sounds very important. But basically all he's saying is that children actively construct knowledge through acting on the world. As they transact with the world, as they engage with the world, so they construct knowledge. So for example, I interact with this and I realize, oh, I can't go through it. Okay, I've learned something. Not something mind-blowing, but I've learned something. And as children grow, they develop different cognitive structures in their brain through transacting. Now, remember I asked you what your theory of development or theory of learning is. Well, Piaget has a profound theory of learning and development, and he says that we are born with innate functions. He calls them assimilation and accommodation. Basically, what these functions are that we're born with is the ability to understand the world in terms of what we already know, and then the ability to shift what we already know when it clashes, when the world clashes with what we already know. Sounds tricky, but let's get there. Okay. Functions are the how of intelligence. How does the mind develop? Through assimilation and accommodation, and they're biologically inherited according to Piaget. Now, remember, Piaget is writing in the 1960s to 1980s. They did not have functional magnetic resonance imaging in that time, okay, which is where you see the brain. You know, those fancy pictures I'll show you later of the brain. He didn't have that. So when he talks about assimilation and accommodation, these are theoretical concepts for him. However, in the 21st century, we do know that children are primed to first understand the world in terms of what they already know before developing further. So, for example, those of you who have had children, when you give your 4-month-old something, what do they do with it? First thing they do with it is in the mouth. Okay, they put it in the mouth because their mouth is the way of understanding their world. When they came out into the world, it was their mouth that gave them access to the world through feeding. Okay, and in order to know what the rest of the world is about, they put it in their mouth. Okay, they're not teasing. They're not trying to eat anything. They're trying to figure out what something is. Okay, and these are the processes that we would call assimilation and accommodation. So when the infant picks up this rubber and puts it into the mouth, it's not food. Okay, so as an infant, I know what food is. This is not food. But it still goes in my mouth, but it's not food. Oh, so I can have something that goes in my mouth that is not food. So there are objects in the world that go in your mouth that aren't food. This is how learning begins. This is how your mind begins to develop, okay? By incrementally trying to engage with your world and find out what fits with your understanding and what clashes. And as something clashes with your understanding, so you develop cognitively. You are not just different to your children because you know more stuff. You are different to your children because your brain is different. If you have ever worked with toddlers or children below the age of 6, you'll know that their brain is different. You know, for example, I mean, a great trick to do with preschool children is to turn off the light and ask them where the electricity went. They have no sense of cause and effect. So they have no idea at all where a light could come from, and they don't think in logical ways. But as they develop, so the children that you get are predominantly concrete operational and formal operational children, according to Piaget. And so the concrete operational is about 7 to 12 or 7 to 14. They can only understand the world if you give them examples, concrete examples, okay? So if you want to teach them something, you have to give them a model of what it is you're teaching them. Formal operational thought are the teenagers, which we're going to get to after this introduction session. And teenagers are able to think in an abstract way. But beware, that doesn't mean they're able to think the way you are. We are very different. And I'm going to leave that video on stage theory for you to watch as well in your own time. But basically for Piaget, these are the stages. He talks about stages of development. So the first stage that a child goes through is sensory motor. What does that mean, sensory motor? They understand things through their senses, and when they begin to crawl and walk through their motor capacity, this is how they are understanding the world, okay? The more stuff your child interacts with, the more stuff an infant interacts with, the more knowledge they grow. What does that mean to you? If I'm saying to you, a toddler, an infant, the more they get to interact with the environment, more different things they interact with, the more their cognition grows. What does this mean to you who are working in after-school clubs? Where do your children come from?
Sorry, it's obviously to enlarge the exposure that they have.
Absolutely. So, where do your children predominantly come from? Those of you working in these after-school clubs. I mean, I'm taking it that most of you are NPO, non-profit organizations. So most of you are what we would think of as human angels, who go out there to make significant differences on a wing and a prayer. What does it mean if the children that you see at, let's say, 12 years old, you're a 12-year-old, and you don't think they're very smart, they can't do maths, you do the same problem 5 times, they don't understand it, they must be stupid. Am I right? Esther Romani, don't I know you? You on mute. Esther?
Sorry. No, I don't think you know me, but I know your work very well.
Oh.
Okay, so no, I don't think it's a child's fault. I think maths involves logical thinking and categories. And I think like a lot of our children, the children that we meet in after-school clubs, come from homes which are very poorly resourced in terms of games and books and all the things that middle-class people take for granted. So I don't think that they would probably be at the same stage as people who have lots of resources at home which develop.
Esther, you are 100% right. I do know your name though. Have I read your work?
I don't know.
I think I've read your work. I know your name very well from somewhere. Esther, you are on the money, right? Okay. Esther's busy saying that the children that you get don't come from Bishop's Court. They don't come from Claremont. They don't come from the suburbs. They come from impoverished areas. If an area is impoverished, the child has very little opportunity to learn more than what is in front of them. Now, this is important. And if you can just remember one thing from this series, this lecture, it's this: no child is stupid. No child is stupid. Some children are faster at learning a task and some children are slower. No child is stupid. No child, unless they've got a panga in their cortical, dorsolateral cortical functioning, no child is stupid. Children either have had access to opportunities or they haven't. And the great news for you guys is that you can shift that. If they come to you without that knowledge, you can put it into them. you can grow them cognitively. This is why when I say you are human angels, you go and do things that have been missed for these children. Missed doesn't mean can't be caught up. Yes, I've got Chrysalis Rumble from Chrysalis Academy, hand up.
Yeah, listen, I would just like to ask one quick question. Many of the kids we work with, especially dealing with FAS and FASD, they already have developmental because of the chemical imbalances in their brain. So this is, again, to me, when listening to this is a child that is a normal kid. He doesn't have any of those challenges already. But to many of us, these are the kids we're dealing with. And so the question basically is, how do we then engage them? If this is a thing, the concentration span is sometimes 2 minutes, 1 minute, then we have to change up and do these kind of things. So how do we go about that kind of
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. Now, when I said that, when I was talking about development, I was talking about normal development. Is your name Rumble or Mr. Rumble? Chrysalis Academy.
My name is Dylan. My surname is Rumble. We got
Okay.
We got the behavior of calling each other on our surnames.
Okay. Dylan Rumble. I'll do both. I'm talking about neurotypical children. Okay, neurotypical children, some will be fast, some will be slow. Now, you're talking about FASD or ADHD are fairly neurotypical, although they do have, okay, no, they're actually quite diverse, but they can be mainstreamed in a way that FASD can't. So what can you do? Behaviorist techniques, Dylan. Chunk the work, make it small tasks, praise what is successfully achieved. I have worked with children with serious learning difficulties and disabilities. You know, IQ of around 75, 80, which is not optimal, but still able to toilet and eat and put shoes on. You would be surprised, you'll be gobsmacked to know how far you can get these children, even though they're deficit, okay? But it's a different thing altogether. So you are having to chunk work, break it into smaller parts, give them access to many different kinds of media. If you can use computers or videos, if you can get funding for that, those kinds of things can be incredibly useful. But of course, dealing with neurodiverse is different to dealing with neurotypical. And Piaget's theory is about neurotypical. It's about universal development, okay? But the theory we're going to go on to now is about differences, okay, neurodiversity. And this is cultural historical theory. This guy here is sort of one of my heroes, is Lev Vygotsky. He was a Russian theorist at the turn of the 20th century. And he was quite brilliant. He basically said that what Dorothy said at the beginning about the children being mediated. Well, Vygotsky said that the only way to develop a child is not simply to give them more stuff like Piaget, okay? So it's not simply to have, like, you know, your ability to play with the doll and the pen. You actually need a mediator, a human other, who tells you what the meaning of that activity is, okay? So when you are, let's say you are learning to eat at supper time, and you know, you put your infant in the chair and the infant's learning to smash everything in their face, what they are learning is the meaning of culturally shared meal. Now, all of us, whether we are neurodiverse, Dylan, or neurotypical, have the ability to learn. Neurodiverse, of course, need a lot more input, okay? And the mediator, that's you guys and me for my students. The mediator is the person who makes something meaningful gives meaning to the task for the student. The student then internalizes that meaning idiosyncratically. So we all think differently, right? All of us sitting here are thinking differently. But we also are neurotypical, most of us. I might be slightly out of my head, I'm not sure. To be an academic, I think you can't be quite normal. We're all fairly neurotypical. Yet we have we internalize knowledge and own it in our own way. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little thing here, so don't freak out if I call on you. When I call your name, so everyone take their mute off, please. So when I call your name, I want you to, right, let's just see. When I call your name, I want you to answer the first thing that comes to mind. Tori, give me a flower.
Rose.
Esther,
Flower.
Lily. Lily.
Dylan, type of flower.
Well,
No, you missed, sorry, off we go. Shannon, type of flower.
Daisy.
Daisy, interesting.
And it definitely.
Audrey, type of flower. What'd you say? Tulips.
Tulips.
Denzel, type of flower.
Sunflower.
All right. Very interesting, guys. Now I'm going to show you. I'm not going to analyze you. Don't worry. You can put your mute back on. But it's very interesting. Now, who was the one who said rose? Was that you, Tori? Was it a red rose? You are so socialized into Valentine's Day, my darling. Most women, when I do this, will not say rose. Mostly men say rose because they think all women like roses. And then when you say what color, they say red. Because you guys have been socialized to believe that women like red roses. Most of us don't. Okay. Now, the interesting, it was very interesting to have a guy mention a tulip, I think. Audrey, did you mention tulip or sunflower? Forgetting. But usually
I said tulip and I'm a girl.
Oh, Audrey, are you a girl? Audrey?
Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Mostly men, when they do this, will answer rose and red, okay? Unless you get the humanities guys, those creative weirdos. So when you do the humanities professors, they'll come up with things like hibiscus. What is a hibiscus? Because they've internalized a very different idea of a flower. Now, when I asked you about a flower, you all knew what a flower was. It's got a stem, stamen, petals, leaves, right? You all knew the abstract notion of a flower. None of you said the same flower. Why? Because we all think differently, even though we all know what a flower is. The meaning that we attach to it is determined by our social, cultural context. One person said daisy. Now, I'm not going to analyze you, but I'm going to analyze me. Daisy's my flower too. Ask me for a flower and I'll say daisy. Why? I grew up living next door to my grandmother. And when my parents got divorced, it was always lekker to go to my granny's house and have peanut butter cookies. And she had daisies all around her house, red and white daisies. I mean, yellow and white daisies, red and white. Yellow and white daisies all around her house. And to this day, daisies smell to me like peanut butter cookies. Because she would bake them and we would go there. So the meaning that you attach to things in your world is idiosyncratic. It is your own meaning that you internalize. However, the general concept of flower has been mediated to you through schooling. so that you know about photosynthesis and all of this. So the mediator, which is you guys, all of you here, and me, is central, crucial to the child's developing cognitive basis, okay? And according to Vygotsky, mediation happens through language in this place called the zone of proximal development. You don't have to worry about this too much. What I can tell you is this zone of proximal development is a social space. So when you're sitting in a social space with peers, friends, teachers, whatever, you all have different zones of proximal development. You all have different levels of competence and expertise in different areas. Am I right? Okay. My level of expertise in cooking, for example, is low. But my level of expertise in psychology is slightly higher. This doesn't make me a stupid, because I don't cook and I don't care to cook as a matter of interest. I don't know why you have to chop onions. They're in layers anyway. Why don't they just unfold as you put them in the pot? You know, so cooking for me is not a huge thing. But the fact that we have different potential to learn means that you're going to have children in front of you. Some of them will know the stuff already, and some of them won't. The one who doesn't know it isn't stupid. That person has the most potential to learn. They have the potential to learn that stuff because they do not yet know it. Okay. So when you see someone, I just got a PhD student referred to me by a colleague who can no longer work with her. And he said to me, it's too bad she's not capable of doing a PhD. Now, remember I told you there's no such thing if you're neurotypical as being incapable. And I looked at her work and I thought, oh my living lights, this is terrible. That was my first opinion was, oh, hell, I don't know how I'm going to help this. And then, because this is the work I do, told me, well, you know what? She has big potential to learn. I had a meeting with her this morning just before coming to this meeting, and it was fantastic because the minute she got it, the minute she got the information, she could fly. Okay. And that happens in the social space called the zone of proximal development. The great thing about humanity, guys, is that cognition is modifiable. Our brains can change. So Dylan, even with the FASD children, their brain can change, okay? Their brain, the pathways in the brain can change. Some pathways will be forever damaged, right? And so other pathways will need to be built. Will not be as successful as a neurotypical, but it can happen, okay? What I wanted to show you here is at different ages, what the different brains are like. This dorsal lateral prefrontal cortex over here, this little block here, is crucial for abstract thinking, for being human, basically, for dancing, for music, for art. And as you can see, 5-year-olds, they don't have it, okay? So it's not yet developed. Preteens don't have it. It's developing, but it's not yet there. Teens don't have it either. 20-year-olds haven't yet got it either. It's about 25 when your brain comes into full functioning. Now, this area, these little blocks, is the executive functioning. So it's that part of your brain that tells you, yes, jump off the roof and see if you can jump into the pool, or no, don't jump off the roof, okay? So when teenagers do things that we find bizarre or dangerous or risky, they don't know any different. They can't stop themselves. They're not being naughty. Their brain is not properly developed. Okay, so what does this mean for instruction? It means that instruction for Vygotsky should lead development. In other words, and this, Dylan, for the neurodiverse students is hell of an important. You can make them, you can lead them, pull them. I actually think of it as pulling them, pull them to a new understanding of the world. Slowly, slowly. but they will get there. It's unbelievable, but it does happen. It works to have children at different developmental phases, okay? So let's say I'm particularly good at English, Tori's particularly good at maths, Esther's particularly good at geography. You put the three of us together to solve a particular problem like climate control. I mean, climate damage, okay? We would work, we would each complement each other. I would pull Tori up around maths, she'd pull me up around history, Esther would know the geography. So in instructional settings, partners shouldn't be at the same understanding. So in other words, you shouldn't put, we used to have, when I was at school, we used to have streams, and you'd put all the A students in A stream. I mean, that was hilarious. I was in the A stream. I have no idea why. And what can you learn? If you all know the same, how can you learn anything? It's quite bizarre. So you rather put people at different levels together. Oh, I don't know who's calling me, sorry. Hello. Whoopsie, sorry about that.
Is someone calling you on Zoom?
So scaffolding is a technique, and this is particularly useful for those dealing with neurodiverse students, okay? So scaffolding is putting in various, like scaffolds, you build a house and then you have the scaffold along, and as the house goes up, so the scaffold goes down. So use things like recruitment, you dealing with neurodiverse about how to teach them. First thing you have to do is gain their attention, okay? So give them something that's pleasurable and exciting. So you know what I do when I start my lectures, I usually start with psych experiments, but hilarious ones, where they kind of do strange things to people. And people get like, ooh, I want to know all about psychology. Reduction in degrees of freedom. This is what I was talking about when I was saying you break into chunks. So if you have a problem to be solved, you would break it into chunks for the person and assist them at each step of the way. Not give them the answer, but give them a bridge towards the answer, saying things like, but I wonder what would happen if you added those two things together, or whatever. Direction maintenance is keeping someone on the right path, okay? Marking critical features. Now, this is something that we take for granted. I'm going to try and show you an example. It's very important to pick up critical features for a student. So if you can see that this reading at the top is in bold. By putting it in bold, I am picking up the critical features. I'm marking what's important. So when you go through work and you underline, that's picking up critical features. Frustration control. Make sure that you don't give students stuff that is way out of their ability to do, okay? Because they're going to do nothing. And demonstration. Demonstration is incredibly useful when you demonstrate how to do something for a student. Let them do it and then demonstrate again. So these are very useful in teaching. I thought I would introduce you as well to ERIKSONS stages of psychosocial development, because what I've been talking about mostly here is development cognitively, because that's my major interest is cognitive development. But ERIKSON about psychosocial development, so the development of your identity in social context. And he has various levels that you go through. There's stages, and at each level, at each stage, you have to go through a crisis. And if you overcome that crisis, then you go on to the next stage. if you don't overcome the crisis in adult life, you can be stuck at a particular stage. So I'll give you an example. In older adulthood, I deal sometimes with elderly people. My partner's a social worker who deals with particularly elderly people. And it's interesting to see the last phase of their life, what Erikson calls the integrity versus despair. Those people who have not had a fulfilled life in terms of whatever is fulfilling for you, okay, and it is your personal thing, are very despairing in old age and basically waiting to die. Whereas those who have led a fulfilled life tend to be more lively, even if they are in fact frailer than the other kind. So what you are dealing with is school-age children, where the they have to deal with is between industry versus inferiority. So they have to know, they have to be able to learn how to succeed. Now, the interesting thing about learning how to succeed is that you have to let a child fail. Now you're going to say, no, you can't fail. The only way to learn how to succeed is to fail and pick yourself up and do it again. Now, if you don't overcome that challenge in school age, you're going to have an inferiority complex as an adult. In adolescence, it's between identity versus identity confusion, which is why it's so important that we let our adolescents explore their gender identities and identify with what they want to be. And in young adulthood, you're dealing with intimacy versus isolation. Can you make long-term relationships? Can you form them, or do you keep making the same mistakes over and over again? Do you have the same type of person that you keep going out with? Cognitive development, can I take a couple of questions? Let me take two because I want to get to the teenager stuff. Couple of questions, guys. There was a lot of stuff.
I have a question. I have a question.
Yes,
so I work for the Butterfly Art Project on a school for the deaf. And so I've got deaf and partially hearing, but they are also on the spectrum. And so learning is rather restricted. And the only learning or formal learning that they have is when they come to the school, because they are children brought in from all different areas. So they already have all these inferior complexes, being there, not being able to relate verbally necessarily, even though I've got somebody signing. Just how to handle from a behavioral point of view their development and how to connect with them.
My video off, Kathy, because my internet's not, I seem to have a bit of a problem here. So how do you deal with these students who have so many difficulties and so many needs? Look, in large groups, it's incredibly difficult, Kathy. And so what I would do is break them into groups of differential ability. So it's not just you alone, but they have different ability groupings, okay? And so the ones who are slightly more capable can help those slightly less capable. That's the first step I would make. The second step, I would make sure that the work is broken down into manageable chunks. And let's not forget to praise and reward. And it doesn't, it doesn't have to be something as significant as a chocolate or something expensive. A good word, a squeeze of the shoulder. These are things that that can mean the world to children. We don't know where they come from. We think we do, but you know, we don't live in a shack with 9 other people and no electricity. So we don't know how even just a small token of our respect for them. And that's another thing I want to just say, is that sometimes we think that because children are younger than us, they don't deserve our respect, or well, maybe not don't deserve our respect, but they don't deserve the same respect that we do. And yeah, and you must respect the child. This is a living human being with ideas and thoughts, and ask them for their opinions.
In fact, that is one thing I have done. And what I find does work is that just acknowledging that they are heard.
Yeah.
That I hear what you are saying. In whichever way possible, I'm hearing what you're saying, so they feel like they've been heard.
Absolutely.
And I pick up that makes it a big difference.
That is brilliant, Kathy. That I couldn't have said it better. To acknowledge that someone is heard. And you know, people, what are the easiest ways to acknowledge that is to learn someone's name and learn how to pronounce it properly. Okay. It seems like such a silly thing, but I have 240 students in my one class. It's very hard to learn their names, but you know what I do? We have a file with all their pictures in, obviously, because we have, you know, their registration. I go and sit and I learn the name and the face. You know what it does to them when you call them by their name? I mean, it's like, you know, it's like, oh, she knows my name. Okay. And also try to make sure that you can pronounce the name properly. So that's one way of hearing people.
But it's also the eye contact. It's making that eye contact that you when you're working with a group, that you're constantly acknowledging everybody in the group. And there are times when they get totally lost because their concentration is not that good because of which level of the spectrum they're on. So you've got to literally learn to keep them all at the same time, which is not the easiest task. But my question is around their development specifically, because if we're exposing them to a lot of things, it's difficult for me to pick up, are they actually following, are they learning from it? And for me, that's a big thing about the transfer of learning taking place.
Yeah. Can you hear me, Kathy?
I can hear you.
Okay. Sorry, my internet has just gone a bit wild. Yes, Kathy. So I believe that assessment is part of teaching, not an end point. So, and when I mean by assessment, I mean questioning, continuous questioning. And it could be assessment in a written form, but it's the beginning, not the end of teaching. Okay, so in order to make sure where they all are, a question is a good way to start.
Yeah, I find that actually questioning throughout with these children, because I'm not quite sure what their understanding is, because even the sign language that they're doing doesn't follow all nuances of the language, so it's very broken information. And so I tend to ask a lot of questions in order to find out what one person's understanding of something is, and then take it through to the next and the next, so that they understand what they are working with, but also I understand what they work with.
Yeah. Okay, Kathy, I'm just going to have to cut you there, my love. Zoe's got a hand up.
It was actually just to add on, Kathy, that I think we will be running one of these masterclasses specifically around how to work with learners that are neurodiverse, and looking a little bit more deeper about these various issues that you've raised. So yeah, we'll hopefully pick that up in one of our further masterclasses. Thanks for that.